I am Ashok Vishandas, Professor of Applied Economics in Indian Institute of Public Administration. Today we are going to discuss about WTO and agriculture. Why WTO? Imagine a situation when many people are driving fast from different directions without traffic light at the road crossing. Will there not be a chaos? As road needs traffic signals for an orderly movement, so does international trade require predictability and stability in the rules of the game, that is, the rules of the business. And World Trade Organization seeks to provide this. The long-term objective of the Agreement on Agriculture (AOA) is to establish a fair and market-oriented agriculture trading system. Its rules include operating a global system of trade rules, acting as a forum for negotiating trade agreement, and settling trade dispute between the members. How WTO came into being? The Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiation, which took place between 1986 and 1994, resulted in an agreement establishing the World Trade Organization, which serves as an umbrella agreement. It was established on 1st January 1995 with 164 members and it is based in Geneva. It is successor to GATT but subsumed GATT. The scope of WTO agreement covers goods, services and intellectual property rights, that is IPR. Annexed to this umbrella agreement are dispute settlement mechanism, the trade policy review mechanism and plurilateral agreements. The original GATT applied to agriculture trade, but it contained a number of loopholes that were exploited by countries, resulting in highly distorted international agricultural trade. There are three pillars of AOA. The AOA is an important outcome of Uruguay round of multilateral trade organization. It introduced discipline in three pillars, that is market access, various trade restrictions confronting import, number two domestic support, subsidy and other program, and three was export competition and other government support program that subsidizes exports. The framework of AAO was intended to provide for the long-term reform of agriculture trade and domestic policy over a period of time. It includes provisions that encourage the use of less trade distorting agriculture domestic support policies. Although the obligation for developing countries looked as less stringent, the provision of the AAOA were framed in such a way that developed countries retain the right to continue to provide high subsidy and use various tariff-related measures which led to distortion of the global agriculture markets. The Doha Ministerial Declaration of November 2001 committed members to substantial improvement in market access, phasing out of all form of export subsidy and substantial reduction in trade distorting domestic support. In 2001, agriculture negotiation became a part of the agenda of the Doha round of trade negotiation. Doha round remains unfinished and it is uncertain when or even whether it will be concluded. Virtually every item of Doha round negotiation is considered as part of whole and indivisible package and cannot be agreed separately. In other words, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Further, all major decisions in the WTO are normally taken by consensus. An agreement to eliminate agriculture support subsidy was pushed through during the 10th Ministerial Conference of WTO held in Nairobi in December 2015. But other parts of the agriculture negotiating agenda, namely market access and domestic support, remained deadlocked. Although the AOA was supposed to result in decline in domestic support in agriculture, in fact, the overall value of such support went up. The agreement obliged developed countries to reduce the AMS, that is aggregate measure of support. However, only some types of subsidy fell under AMS. While developing countries reduced their AMS, they also increased at the same time their exempted subsidy significantly, thereby offsetting the AMS reduction and resulting in an overall increase in the total domestic support. Various kinds of subsidy and support are broadly classified in three different boxes, namely green box, blue box and amber box. Green box include the amounts spent on government services such as research, disease control and infrastructure and food security. Since they are permitted in WTO regime, the most developed countries have kept providing subsidy to their farmers. It is important to note that many of the provisions of the Green Box support, that is Annexure 2 of the AOA, were formulated to allow developed countries to continue providing subsidies without any limit. To illustrate the point, the provision allows the US to provide unlimited subsidy through its food stamp scheme. On the other hand, developing countries are constrained by their de minimis limit in providing support for food security through public stock holding programs. Under Blue Box, subsidies are provided to limit production by imposing production quota or requiring farmers to set aside a part of their land. And there is no upper bound on the amounts of such subsidies. Given the shortage of food production in developing countries, little wonder then that developing countries have not been able to take recourse to this option. Empirics show that these provisions have been mainly used by EU and by US in some years. Thus, AOA resulted in a category of domestic support that can be used by developing countries without any limit. Amber Box, also called the aggregate measure of support, nearly all domestic support measures considered to distort production and trade, with some exception, fall into this box. It consists of two parts: product-specific subsidy and non-product-specific subsidy. Any domestic support which is not covered under the category of Green Box or Blue Box is categorized in the Amber Box support. It includes price support measures and all non-exempt direct payments. In the case of India, the minimum support program is covered under this. Imbalance in the export subsidy pillar. The imbalance and asymmetry in the provision of export subsidy in the AOA are huge. Countries that were providing high export subsidy in the period of 1986 to 1988 acquired the legitimacy to continue to provide export subsidy in future also. On the other hand, most of the developing countries did not provide export subsidy during the reference period, that is 1986 to 88. As a result, they are unable to provide significant export subsidies. Tariff binding. Quantitative restriction on agriculture import were put in place in India mainly due to balance of payment regions. Following the Uruguay round, India only had to bind its tariff and schedule the bound rates, and she submitted binding tariffs ranging from just 15% to 300%. Notwithstanding high bound rates, the actual applied rates of tariff on most agriculture products in India were very low. For about 90% of tariff line, the applied rates are up to 50% in case of India. An important part of India's agriculture support regime is the minimum support price for public procurement operation of staple food items. Under the de minimis provisions, as a developing country, India is entitled to provide 10% of total value of production of basic agriculture product as product specific support and 10% of the value of total agriculture production as non-product specific support. Emerging scenario in AOA. The WTO is facing multiple challenges. Given the slow progress under the Doha round and the lack of consensus on how to move forward, WTO's negotiating arm is almost paralyzed. During 2008 and 2013, the Doha negotiation remained in a state of dormancy. Peace clause permits developing countries to procure foodstuff for public stock holding program, even if the domestic support that is attributable to the procurement exceeds the ceiling of subsidy provided in the AOA. The term peace clause has been the cause of disquiet ever since India flagged the issue of domestic food security in the WTO negotiations. At India's insistence, the WTO members agreed to put in place an interim mechanism for the issue of public stock holding in relation to support provided for traditional staple food crops in pursuance of public stock holding program for food security purposes. What lies ahead? From 2015 onward, developed countries and some developing countries no longer endorsed the Doha round and instead started negotiation on electronic commerce, investment facilitation, trade, gender and MSME. WTO is cast in the mold of interests of developed world and its rules have curtailed the policy space for developing countries. But some developing countries like India have gained in agriculture sector as it is the net food exporting country. US is attempting to marginalize WTO and is likely to aggressively seek bilateral deals, and it is not merely a short-term disruption. Developed countries have virtually resorted to the phenomena of kicking away the ladder, meaning thereby that once a country has attained the summit of greatness, she kicks away the ladder by which she has climbed up in order to deprive others of the means of climbing up after her. In the aftermath of COVID-19, with a paradigm shift towards the Atmanirbhar, there will be an increasing tendency to reduce dependency on other nations for key food supplies. Consequently, rules of the game of WTO are likely to undergo irreversible changes sooner than later. World is changing rapidly and WTO is smart enough to keep pace with emerging changes. Thanks.